Good morning and good afternoon. I'm Allison Bainbridge. I am so excited to welcome both you, our viewers, and our panel of speakers today to a very special book passage event. We have found over the past year and a few months that we've had to adapt in many ways, all of us have. And though as an event host, I really miss our live bookstore events, we've also been privileged to offer some amazingly unique presentations with incredible authors and guests that we might not normally be able to host since our events are virtual now. Today's salon is a beautiful example of that. You have the unique opportunity today to participate in a literary salon featuring best-selling author Mary Alice Monroe and her co-author of The Islanders, Angela May, in conversation with Aladdin Simon & Schuster book editor Ali Heller and literary agent Faye Bender, talking about writing, reading, publishing, and more. New York Times bestselling author Mary Alice Monroe and Angela May have created a beautiful story of friendship, loss, and the healing power of nature in her first book for middle grade readers. We're thrilled to announce that The Islanders debuted at #2 on the New York Times bestseller list, which is phenomenal. 11-year-old Jake's life is just turned upside down. His father has been wounded in Afghanistan, and his mother is going to leave to care for him, which means Jake's spending the summer on a tiny island with his grandmother and without his friends, a cell phone, or computer, because his grandmother does not believe in technology. The authors give us a summer that many of us have either dreamt about or remember nostalgically. Mary Alice Monroe is the New York Times bestselling author of 27 books, including her newest novels, Summer of Lost and Found, and her first middle grade book, The Islanders. Her books have been published worldwide. She's earned numerous accolades and awards. Her bestselling novel, The Beach House, is also a Hallmark Hall of Fame movie. She is a co-founder of the hit web show and podcast Friends in Fiction, which I highly recommend. She's an active conservationist. She lives in the low country of South Carolina. She's coming to us from an island that she lives on. Angela May is the founder of May Media and PR and a former award-winning television news journalist who helps promote great books and share important community stories as a media specialist. She's been working with Mary Alice Monroe for more than a decade. The Islanders is their first book together. Angela's husband is a middle school assistant principal, and they have 2 children and live in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. Ali Heller joined the Aladdin team in 2008 after a 2-year stint in the Simon & Schuster Associates program. She acquires picture books, chapter books, middle grade, with a soft spot for contemporary middle grade. On both the nonfiction and fictional side, she has a particular affinity for strong female characters who kick butt and take names, stories that represent the underrepresented, and stories that take on tough stuff in the middle grade space. So needed right now. And with a focus on strong collaborative working relationships with her authors, Faye Bender, our last but not least discussant, represents fiction for readers aged 8 to adult. Her authors have won numerous awards and honors, including the Newbery Medal, and have been finalists for the National Book Award and the Impact Dublin Literary Award. Her clients' books have been #1 New York Times bestsellers, New York Times Book Review notable books, and selected for many Best Books of the Year lists. She was born and raised in Denver, and Faye lives in Brooklyn with her husband and 2 children. Take it away.
Hello. Well, it's so nice to be and share the stage with y'all.
Agreed. This is such a treat.
I know and everyone out there, we're all excited because this, we don't take for granted that the book hit #2 on the New York Times list on the debut. That was
#2.
Yeah, #2. We're very excited. So in a celebratory mood, let's begin. And let's start our discussion today by describing for everyone what is middle grade fiction. I know there's a lot of confusion in the industry as well as amongst the gatekeepers, the parents of the young readers who buy the books. What is the difference between middle grade fiction and young adult books? So let's begin the discussion. Everyone can join in and add something else. Allison, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I feel like the biggest thing, there's some kind of, besides the age, in middle grade, most of the characters are either 8 to 12, 9 to 13 in that range. YA technically is that 14 up. But one of the biggest things for me in terms of the difference in middle grade and YA is what the main character and their kind of ensemble cast tends to focus on. So you're thinking of things of how a character looks at through their lens. So maybe in the middle grade space, in the younger space, they walk into a building and they notice different kind of details rather than the cute boy or girl at the counter. Maybe they notice the delicious looking pie and in the display case instead.
That's a great way
So,
to put it.
so I think it's all in how they are looking at their own world, and it usually is more contained within their family and their friends and within school. And of course, how we are also decimating all that information. Certainly, it doesn't
Mhm.
mean that in the younger realm we can't discuss, as you do so beautifully, Mary Alice and Angela, in the Islanders. It's not like we can't discuss tough topics, but it's really just in how we are presenting that to our readers.
Right.
And Faye, yeah.
Yeah, one thing I would add that is not as relevant to what you asked, but I think is something people grapple with a little bit, is also there are books that are narrated by younger characters that are not middle grade or young adult. They are
Oh, I'm
adult.
so glad you said that.
And I
Yes.
think that for me, the best way to figure that out as a reader, because I often get submissions for books and the authors are maybe unclear themselves, like I'm not entirely sure which demographic this is for. And I think the difference is when the protagonist is a younger person and the world that is explored and seen through that person's lens is the world of younger people, then it's usually middle grade or adult. When it's the world of adults seen through the lens of a younger person, it's typically adult. So, you know, it's the world, it's exactly what Ali said. It's the pie on the counter or the, you know, cute person at the counter, but it's not the experiences and thoughts of adults.
I'm so glad you said that because I understood fully the age specific quality, but not, for example, a friend of mine is writing a book that's really an adult book, but the protagonist is young. So how do you make that decision? That's really smart. I think for a lot of younger readers, I use Harry Potter because that's just such an important, everyone knows that story. And I always say those first couple of books of Harry Potter were definitely middle grade. He was younger, it was Hogwarts, it was school. But as they got older, there were a lot more darker questions asked and little sexual overtones as they become aware of each other as boy and girl that clearly settled it into young adult. And I think that's a good way to also have a series. I know when we wrote our book, The Islanders, we did not shy away from any important topics. So maybe we should talk about that. I'm kind of out of order here a little bit, but we segued into this. The topics, the content of the stories for middle grade can be very serious and intense. Who wants to talk about that?
I would love to jump in and talk on that. I think what's really good about remembering for middle grade and is that the reader who you're speaking to and the protagonist that you're featuring, I mean, every kid goes through really tough things, and some people in real life have a lot tougher stages that they have to go through than others. And so I do think it's wonderful how that in middle grade you can explore any category, but just keeping focused on, you know, what they're familiar with at that reading level. I loved how we were able, Mary Alice, to start the book right off with a really difficult situation that our protagonist is in, which is getting uprooted from his home in New Jersey, where his military family lives, sending him off, making him a castaway, so to speak, to this remote barrier island to be with his grandmother. And everybody in the family is going through a lot of grief at that time. That's very real because your parent is injured. Jake's parent is injured. They don't know what his fate is going to be. Is he going to survive? What's going to happen? And I mean, we really came right out of the gate with that. But just because you write about heavy topics doesn't mean that it's a heavy or a depressing story. Don't you guys think? Like, I feel like as in real life, in the fictional world, we had to balance it with,
Well,
the
right.
beauty of the up and downs of imaginations and the true lives of children.
Right. I mean, I think our job as adults, as parents, as caregivers, as aunts and uncles, as writers, as editor, I mean, in every role, our job is to protect kids as we can, but not to bubble wrap them, not to sort of keep them in an unrealistic kind of protective shield where they're not exposed to things, because I think in the end that is damaging as the opposite. So I think for kids to really be able to see whatever they're going through, whether it relates or not to the protagonist of a book they're reading or a side character, there's some degree of understanding or empathy or sympathy or relatability to struggles and figuring out who we are and what our role is in the world around us. And I think that is the best part about middle fiction.
Mhm.
And I think
And Allie, what about you? What do you feel?
I was saying, I think bouncing off of this too, with the tough stuff, I think with middle grade too, it's important to be able to also find the joy as well. I think, there's certainly not always going to be a perfectly neat, wrapped in a bow, happy ending, but certainly I think what you've done again in the Islanders and other books that I've edited and read that do deal with these tougher topics, even as the main character is going through something a little bit tougher, or they're dealing with the family issues or friendship issues, or a parent going through a hard time, by the end, you do get a sense that even if there's no specific resolution, that there's going to be hope for this person, that there's going to be hope for the character. And I think that's also important to share with the readers too, that, even though you can go through it, there's certainly always going to be some sort of way to find that light, find that happiness, find that joy in some way. And I think that's also important to show both sides too.
And I know as a writer, and I do that with honestly with both my adult and my children book, I do look for hope always at the end. But for this book, I didn't want to fall into the trap of a sweet world, as Faye was referring to. And I know for me, diversity was really important. So we were important. We had a boy, we had a girl, and an African-American boy. And it was to show of diversity. We also wanted diverse finances, kids who didn't have as much money, those who did. We wanted to show, again, shame is a big issue I think that whole middle grade era of what do people think of me is so important. So they all had issues that were personal. Another one though that I really struggled with it with Angela, we talked a lot about, was when I started writing Macon, the African-American boy, I was informed by a lady who works with me with the Audubon that she has a group that works, it's an advocacy group that works towards helping African-American kids, Black kids, kids of color, learn to swim. Now we live near the ocean, and that's a big deal. I mean, there's a lot of drownings, a higher percentage of drownings. And yet it was being sensitive at this for, culturally sensitive. We had sensitivity readers, Allison, as you know. That was a big question. So I don't think we did not shy away from it. We brought it into the book. But it goes back to the point that was made earlier, that this was an important subject that we wanted to cover. But we found a way in middle grade to make it comfortable for both the kids and the gatekeepers, the parents, to read. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much.
Also important that for all the wonderful books that are out there in middle grade, some of them are fantasy world, some of them are based in real life situations, but at the end of the day, the reader, they're really keen, like they know when things like don't add quite up. And so
Yeah.
I think we had to be very aware of making sure that all of it stayed true to what kids might experience. I mean, not everybody's going to get a chance to go and stay on a beautiful barrier island, filled with amazing animals for a summer. But the way that you interact with each other and the experiences that you share, that had to ring true. And we took a lot of time working on that.
Well, Angela, I think you having 2 kids in that age group helped a lot.
Right, you had a test market right there.
That's
Yes,
true. They
exactly.
do keep you honest.
Speaking of a test of a test market. My grandson read it when he was just 10. He was my first editor. Sorry, Allie. He was
That's
my
okay.
first reader.
They're the most astute sometimes, I have to say.
Oh my
so.
gosh, he was like the
They pick
beginning's
everything.
kind and brutal. Can I just say,
Yes.
you're
Oh,
not
yeah.
just
Absolutely.
my grandson. He told me too slow at the beginning. So I was horrified because I'm used to a slow start anyway for my adult novels. So we ripped it apart, and he gave us 2 thumbs up, by the way.
Oh, good. Good.
Let me segue into another subject that's very close to this. There is a misperception, I think, out there that writing for kids is easier. You know, it's just a simpler story in a simple language. And let me tell you from personal experience, that is absolutely not true.
Yeah.
I think middle grade readers, like Angela just said, are very wise and sharp, and they know if it's ringing true. But also, you have to, as a writer, really be prepared to write for this audience. And I'd love to hear Faye and Allie, as an editor and an agent, talk about this misconception.
Yeah, I mean, I see it a lot. I think there are authors who think that it will be easier to write for children, for younger readers than for adults. And I think that really across the board, 100% of the time, younger readers are more discerning and are less willing to abide by, loops in logic or, mistakes in voice. I think that the thing that we talk about all the time in the industry, Allie and I, are, the idea of voice, particularly in middle grade. The character, you can't feel the authorial presence in the book. You can't, if a kid, I mean, it's like they're dogs who can sniff out the, like if there's this sense
So
of
true.
the grown-up voice, if
Like the
there's that
Don.
sense of a grown-up voice, they're like, no
Oh,
way,
now I'm
not-
terrified. I
Mhm.
didn't
I'm not
even know that.
Yeah, so all the time I get submissions from authors who are interested in writing middle grade, and I will read a tiny snippet of it, and I can tell within moments whether the voice is sort of on or not. And if it's not, there are a lot of things that can be fixed. Story can be fixed, pacing can be fixed, dialogue can be tweaked. There's a lot of stuff that a great editor like Allie can do. In my experience, Allie, maybe yours is different, but in my experience, voice cannot. It is there from
I
the
agree.
beginning, or it's
Mhm.
not.
I agree. Absolutely. And I think kind of piggybacking off what Faye said in terms of kind of these kids who can totally sniff out the authenticity of it. I also get a lot of comments sometimes when people say, oh, the reference of, okay, that's great that you work in children's, like, do you ever want to edit like real books? And I'm like, they are the most real books out there. Like, have you not picked up a children's book in the past like 5 years? I feel like there's such a wealth, and I think Faye, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there's such a wealth of such amazing middle grade books in particular that have come onto the scene, including Islanders in the past few years, especially, where I think we're not as afraid, or the gatekeepers at least aren't as afraid to embrace these tougher topics or books that do deal with real life. And that's one of my biggest pet peeves, and I'm sure the same for you, Faye, is when they're like, the real books are out. I'm like, these are real books in so many different ways. So I think that's one of the biggest things that we always want to combat, and just say that there isn't art. It's actually, as Faye just mentioned, like, it's actually harder because the children's detectors are so in tune with what they know to be real, and they know to be true, and they will absolutely tell you. They will tell you whether or not.
They will.
I guess
And the
that's
other
what my
thing is-
grandson told me, right? The first
Right.
draft.
Eat it up. But the
Yes.
other thing I think is really interesting and somewhat unique, there are obviously book series for adult readers, but I think something that is more applicable in the middle grade and young adult space, but we'll talk about middle grade here, of course, is the idea of a series and what a challenge it is for an author or co-authors to write a whole satisfying, cohesive book that ends with an ending that feels like an ending, knowing that it's going to lead into a continuation of the story. And I think that is a really, really challenging it's tough. I don't know how authors can do it and give that sense of closure with the first book. So I think
Well, I
hats
have
off
to
to
say,
both of
you
you.
know, I've done 2 different kinds of series for adults, as you know, Faye, so well, but one was written with each book as a standalone, but the story continued. And one series was written with like Hunger Games, where you must read them in order, or it
Right.
doesn't make sense. And this is a series, and Angela and I knew at the beginning what book 2 was right away. And the hardest part for us was book 1 was twice as long. And we had so many. Oh, Allison, there's a lot written.
Okay, good.
We have so much that we had to, once you have it all down, then of course pacing and what's the story question and answering it. This is where experience does come in, where you say, okay, we're going to put this over here for later. And that's that story. And these scenes are for this story. So for young writers out there who might be listening, you have to know what is the point of the story, what is the story question, and the character's story arc. And anything that doesn't answer that in the small amount of words you have in a middle grade book just goes out and into something else, or just in a file somewhere, because you have to keep that story moving. Pacing, I think, don't you agree, is critical for middle grade?
I agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think, like your grandson said, Mary Allison, I think was a note that even I promise was simultaneous, was wanting to get into the action a little bit more. And I do think you have to be able to grab, I think now, especially with all the distractions, I think that are out there with all the electronics, and they want to be on the computer, whatever, especially this year with having to be, I think, so focused on the Zoom and having to do so many things online. You do want to capture their attention as fast as you can, and, you know, make them want to care not just about the story, but the characters themselves.
So true. I think from, you know, as I said, I have my own personal experience with writing in so many different levels. Just briefly, picture books is another world completely. And that's very hard to write. You can you can write picture books for adults to read to their children. But if you're really writing for that young new reader, language is like poetry. And it isn't easier. It's hard. I think maybe the hardest of all. So I'm just, for any of you out there who think, oh, I can do it because there's only a few words on each page, think again. One of the questions I wanted to talk, or things I wanted to talk about, is what excites you when it crosses your desk, both as an agent and as an editor. And please use the Islanders, you know, good and bad as an example. But what, you know, everyone wants to know, you know, what, when you get so many submissions, what are you clued into? Who wants to start?
Well, maybe I'll start because I do it a little bit first, and then it goes to Allie. But for me, it's the idea of something really kind of fresh and unique. And for this book, there are many things about that fall into that category, but the setting of Dewees is something that I've never seen, not just Dewees, but this idea of this island that has no cars and that is feels so, I mean, like out of time almost, with this incredible natural beauty. I think that in combination with the passion that the two of you really have for that location, but also that whole part of the country, and the, you know, the animals that live there, and just the knowledge that you guys brought to that, I think really elevated this story that is so beautiful. It could have been set anywhere. The story of these 3 friends who spend their summer together learning new things, but it's just it's elevated to the next level because of this incredible setting. So that I think for me, just the idea of something that feels untold or unseen as of yet, that feels really fresh and different. And you know, again, sort of going back to what we already said, voice. It's all about voice.
Yeah, and you know, in the similar fashion, I think as an editor, I look for things that also are a little different, that can set our list and stand out for sure. And with the voice, which is same for me, like if I open up a manuscript and I just feel like something's off, it's, it's not going to really quite connect. But in reading this, and I think as Faye mentioned, because you both have such a passion for the area, for the conservation, that really came through, your own story behind the story, as we like to say. I think that just came out so well. And I think that's what also elevated this book in particular, is knowing that there were two people behind it that were so passionate about the characters representing Dewees and, the sea turtle hatchlings, and something that I certainly had not edited before in that same way, where we wove in so much of that into the narrative. And I think that's a question for a little bit later, of having that nonfiction elements where we were really in real time within the story, seeing how the hatchlings work and how, the kids came together to do that. I think that element was woven in so beautifully. I think that was a big part too of why not only did we all love it, but just because why so many readers, I think, have come to it as well. So I think that was really, again, just both of your passions, and seeing that come through so strongly in the story really, really sold it.
Well, we definitely are passionate about it.
Can I ask you just asked a question of me and Allie. Can I ask a question of the two of you?
Yes,
So
please.
my
Of course.
question, I think that one of the things I love about the Islanders is the fact that these three friends communicate so beautifully, and they have moments where they're not getting along as well, moments where they're thick as thieves, but through it all, they figure out how to communicate with each other. And I think that leads to the whole idea and question of how was it to co-write a book, and how for the two of you to communicate in that way and think about, hone in on what you wanted to say and how to say it. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Mary Alice, you go first, because this is my first book. Mary Alice is the pro with like 27 titles to her name. So how was it having to write with someone else?
Well, you have to understand, this is my first collaboration as well. And I'll be totally honest with you. It was, I'm very territorial about my words. And it's not something I took lightly, but I've been working with Angela for a long time. And I knew when we would work together with research, and Angela would write something, and I'd fix it, and she'd send it back, and we had a lot of back and forth between us. I trusted her talent. I trusted her ability to work with me. I can be kind of, I hope I'm not always mean, but I can be kind of, I can be territorial about, I just like, I rip things apart. It's just my nature. And I'm fast. And I'm probably not necessarily the easiest one to write with, but Angela and I shared so much, not only the trust, but we both talk about what we love about nature and our ideas. And we both loved Dewees, and we both had the same passions. So it just came together like this. Don't you think, Angela? And then tell the story about when I asked you. That's what, because to write a middle grade, Faye, that was my dream. Yep. That's why we connected at so many levels. Yep. The day we fell in love.
We did. We fell in love with each other across the room.
I love it.
We did. It was a pickup and a lunch. And but we just had so many things in common, and so it just happened. And yet when this idea, I was asked to write this middle grade series, yes, it was easy. So Angela, take over about when I asked you, because it's another way of how we are so alike.
Yes, well, as Mary Alice said, we've worked together for many years. And to be clear to everyone who's listening to our conversation, I work behind the scenes, not anything that deals with Mary Alice's books, but just to help support her through public relations and media and events. And so when I was at the office one day, she was like, "Hey, I have a question to ask you. Would you be willing to write a middle grade fiction book with me?" And I'm like, what? I mean, it was a shocking, wonderful moment. Like, the two best moments so far professionally is the day that Mary Alice actually asked me to write with her, which was a dream that I had only whispered to my husband. And she spoke it out loud. And then the second most amazing was, well, there's three. The second most amazing was when our book actually got published and we got to see it. And then the third was this past week when we hit #2. I mean, just all incredible. But
you became a New York Times bestselling author. Can I just say?
Right out of the gate.
Yes.
and I am so grateful for this opportunity. And but when you asked me, that was an easy yes, Mary Alice, you know that. But there were a few times, y'all, I did when it was my turn to turn back in like the manuscript for her time to work on it, I would be like, okay, so just putting it out there, if you want to take back the offer, you don't want to write with me anymore, it's okay, and she would laugh. We do work really well as a team. And it's not to say that it was easy the whole time, because I think no writing project ever is, right? All things worth doing are usually have difficult times to get through. But what matters more is we communicate really well together and we work really well together. And I love that we are at two different points in our lives too, which I feel like in hindsight, looking back at the story, y'all, that it deepened our characters and their dynamics, because I'm in the middle of motherhood right now, the kind that leaves you exhausted and tired, but in the best of ways, raising two busy kids. And then Mary Alice, she's the wise one who has been there, done that with 3 kids at home and is now a grandparent. And so, my gosh, I just love the way that we were able to feed off of each other.
I think that added that depth of characterizations for everybody. And speaking of characterizations changing, it was 4 years by the time we actually finished. And don't worry, Allie, the next one's not taking 4 years. But
I'm confident it's fine.
No, we got it down. But this, it was the learning curve, not only of writing, but also of creating this middle grade story. And the characters did deepen and expand the more we got to know them. Honey is a good example of a character who was the sweet grandmother at the beginning. And only when we took on this depression and the mystery meat in the fridge,
yes,
and things like that, how does an older woman fall into depression? How you don't want to say she's depressed. How do you show it in a kid's world? That's one of the keys of writing, for all writing, but especially with kids, is that they take in what they see, what their senses tell them. So they're on their own and they're scared and they're opening up refrigerators and there's no food to eat. That's a big deal. And it's, the rest of us would figure it out, but for a little child, it's a big deal. So all these characters deepened as the story became more firmly rooted in Angela and I. I just want to jump into one of the things. Can we talk about timeline a little bit? I know that a lot of people out there are curious, what are the stages a book goes through from submission to publication? So let's just kind of quickly give that bird's eye view. Faye, let's talk about the first one, the agent author process, the submission and what develops.
Yeah. Well, so typically Mary Alice and I have an established relationship. We've worked together over many books. So for us, I think there's a lot of back and forth about ideas and what about this one? Do you think this one? What's the next sort of strategic step? What's calling to you creatively? We have those conversations together. And there are always, I think for an author, I would imagine there's a creative path and there's a strategic path, and ideally those are the same.
But not always.
Sometimes they're not. And so you have to have the conversation about like, what if I really want to do this one? And then, I will do everything to support. So you kind of have to communicate through it. So there's a lot of conversation about books. There's a fair amount of back and forth on idea, on, I do a lot of editorial work with authors when they need it. You deliver such clean manuscripts, so you rarely need that. But
hold your horses. It's a coming.
I'm ready. Bring it. but really a lot of back and forth and just a
Yeah.
ton of communication, I would say. And, that extends far beyond, the next step is then selling the book to a publisher, to an editor like Allie. But, as an agent, that's not when I then sort of tiptoe back and disappear, because I think it's really important to stay involved in, come brainstorming ideas for the cover or for blurbs or marketing and publicity, or, have the things that are supposed to be happening are the things that are supposed to happen happening. So to stay really involved in the process all along the way. Do you think that
Mhm.
kind of sums it up?
Yes, thank you. So Allie, you jump in now. First, you start a relationship with the agent, and
Sure.
then you start with the author.
Yeah, of course. So, it's so nice. I think in our industry, there are people like Faye, who is so lovely and wonderful and awesome. And, it's so nice that this is the first book that her and I have been able to work together on, which is so nice. And so usually we have, I think the editor for the agent, we have, contacts, or a lot of times lately, there's been a lot of, new agencies that have come up. So I've been able to foster new relationships that way. But a lot of times, one of the big
Mhm.
part of the relationship and the agent knowing who to submit to, essentially. So they'll kind of get their sublist together. They will submit out to the editors who they think would be a great fit for this project. I mean, in this case, in a lovely way, Mary Alice, you published already so many great books with our lovely gallery folks upstairs. So we were able to kind of connect in that way with Aladdin. But once we have the submission, you hope, fingers crossed, everything connects in a great way. We make an offer. We hope that the agent and the author will accept it, and then we get to celebrate, and then we start the process of then digging in creatively. So as Faye mentions, she certainly stays involved with making sure everything is on track and making sure that everyone's happy. And then, in my opinion, I think for the editor, I am more of a book doctor, a collaborator. Certainly, it's to stay on track within the house, making sure that when we want the book to come out, it will stay on that schedule, and make sure that we're positioning it in the right way, both in and out of house. There's a lot of strategy involved in when we want to have the book come out. So for Islanders, obviously with the subject, with I think also with your amazing publication schedule that you already had coming out. I want to say Mary Alice had 2 books coming out this year, both hitting the list, which is incredible. Proud of you. So I think that, we had a lot of conversations as well with the gallery group as well, and where Islanders would best position, but considering that we want this to be a summer release. And then, as you saw, we go back and forth on the voice, on the characterization, on the plotting, on the pacing. You see many rounds. I feel like, and that's, I think, for an editor, you also want to make sure that you're going to have books on the list that you are happy to read 10 times over, 20 times over, how many times you ever, that you need to get it to where you want, because it's a labor of love, I think, on all ends. And you will stick with the book for not just the route of publication, but even post that, because we have another book coming. So we want to stay in the world. And I think, again, that relationship is so much fun. I feel like it's such an honor to have people trust me, the house, with your work, with something that's so personal to you. And so I just try to honor that the best that I can. And I think same for you, I'm sure, too, in terms of just honoring the word and honoring the work. That's really the goal, and how I
Well, I
want.
think in middle grade, one of the things that we really look to you, an editor, for, and is artwork. In middle grade in particular, as an adult novelist, you hope for a good cover, and you don't always get one. So you have to work with them a little bit. But I remember being really apprehensive, because art, I think, just as the artist myself, and as a writer, that the art's so critical in middle grade.
Mm-hmm.
Not only the cover, but the interior of the book. We struck gold right off the bat. I mean, y'all, look at this cover. This is like the cutest cover in the world.
So
And the
wonderful.
kids
Look
are,
at that.
and the other thing I love about middle grade is they don't have all the words in the back. It's a panoramic view.
You love doing a good
It's
wrap.
really gorgeous. Look at that back. So, and also interior, there's a lot of really great art. So even chapter headings, I'm going to get this straight. can you talk a little bit about how you choose the art and how that all develops?
Sure. I mean, I feel like for this, in Mary Alice, once we had kind of the more final manuscript, I think with this particular story, Jake does a lot of journaling, he does a lot of drawings. So we wanted to make that a part of the book because we knew it would enhance. I do want to say not all middle grade books have spot illustrations or, full illustrations, but for this one, we thought it was appropriate. And so Jennifer Bricking, who did the amazing jacket art, agreed to do some interior spots for us. And so we felt, based on what she was able to do with the cover, she'd also create these really beautiful kind of sketch-like drawings on the interior. So our designer, Tiara, just kind of directed her. Mary Alice and Angela, I know you sent in specifics of what you wanted in terms of, you want to see the animals, you want to see, certain handwriting fonts. So we relay all that to Tiara. She relays that all to Jen, and Jen came back with just some gorgeous interior illustrations and something that we are going to continue with for book 2, of course. And I think because of the nature of the book, because it was, again, a lot of it was nature and conservation, we showed a lot of the animals. We wanted to have the readers actually visualize what, Jake is seeing on the island for the first time through his eyes. So that's why we want to do them here. And I think they added such a great touch. And I just love all the little headers, the little hatchlings inside. And I think, again, the beach scene is just so beautiful, what she did on the front. So I can't wait to see. I know she's working hard on getting a sketch for book 2. So hopefully I can show that to you all in a few weeks. So,
Oh, so
Ooh.
exciting.
yes.
Covers really are exciting. They really are. And
Until
we
they're
know
not.
what we hope for, but it just hit it out of the park.
Beautiful.
It was really nice to see some of the creatures come alive with the
Yes.
interior art. I can't wait for children everywhere to get caught up in all of that.
Well, can I just ask one question too for everybody? Angela, if you can jump in first. We talked earlier about important topics, and I think one of the reasons this book did so well in the first week out is the timeliness of the two areas in the book that I think are very important and serious topics that kids today are really tuned into. It's why I wanted to write for this age group, is that they believe they can change the world. This is the age group that says, we're going to clean that ocean. Yeah, okay, climate change, we're on it. Wake up, old people. We're going to stop messing around. You're delaying and fixing. So I have great faith in this generation that we hope will save the planet. So it is a topic that is very close to my heart. And in this book, these kids are connecting to nature. They're not afraid of bugs. They're learning the names of what's wild so that it becomes their own backyard. And we're experiencing right now throughout the country extreme hot weather, and we're realizing the impact of humans on climate change and climate refugees and deforestation, destructions of ecosystems, really tough topics. And I'm just bringing out to everybody, what do you think in general about the impact of children's literature on the awareness of climate change and serious global impact for their futures, as well as the whole world's future?
I think there's incredible fiction and nonfiction being published now for this age group. And I think that you're exactly right, that kids of this age have the ability to do things, and also the confidence, this sort of unflagging confidence that they can change things without that tinge of cynicism that I think starts to come in with adolescence. Yes. And so it's so important. I mean, I see this with my own kids who have just finished 4th and 7th grade, that, they're in this age where they really do feel 100% confident that they will be able to change things, that it's not too late, things haven't gone too far. And so this kind of book, a book like The Islanders, that so beautifully wraps up these very important topics and teaches kids so much. I mean, that's another thing, back the question, a half an hour ago about what's so wonderful about this book and what sort of what felt unique and different about it is it's a book that teaches kids so much about the world around them, about the wild world that's just outside the door, about being able to stand up for protecting that world. There's a tremendous amount of education, but it's also it's entertaining, it's joyful, it's fun, it's just like the perfect way to deliver that kind of education. So I think there's incredible fiction and nonfiction for kids in this age group that's doing that really actively.
Yeah, and agreed. I mean, I've seen, not just with the Islanders and the way that it was just so relatable and accessible. I think that's the key too, is that what we're seeing is that, as we said, where kids can kind of see that meter and know when we're kind of being too didactic on something. I think with this, the nice part is that they're kind of learning. It's like sneaking the zucchini in the milkshake or whatever, they just don't even know they're getting like these tidbits of nonfiction and learning in that way, because they're learning about all the other things that they're already really relating to. I mean, I've seen that inside, again, beside the Islanders, I know on the nonfiction side, we're seeing biographies like from Greta Thunberg about other, climate changers, and a couple of books that are coming out, I know, deal with, I think, like birding and bird watching, and again, in that conservation in that way. So I think we're really seeing a lot of breadth and depth, more specifically in like the climate change and conservation arenas, more than I've seen personally in the past few years. So I think that bodes well for, again, what the kids will do in the next few years, how they're going to change the world.
Well, kudos to Aladdin too. They came up with, for everyone out there who are doing homeschooling or teachers or educators, Aladdin came up with a really great cross-curriculum materials. And they're found on my website, www.maryalicemonroe.com. So you can use this book. And it does have a lot of cross-curriculum activities, in particular, the journal. The journal, I think, is a really key aspect. Angela, why don't you just give everyone a bird's eye view of what that journal is all about?
Well, in the story, the journal has two different forms. Jake, our protagonist, gets handed to him his father's old journal. And this is a journal of when his dad was a kid, and he used it as a nature journal. And then Jake takes the journal, and he's supposed to emulate what his father does. And he does that and learns to do it well with his friends. But he also spirals off to do his own thing with journaling. And instead of documenting his own day, like writing more so for himself, he writes to his father, letters to his father. And through these forms of journaling that you see Jake doing, as well as his friends and the things that his grandmother Honey is trying to teach, you see the education of learning and absorbing what the island has in store for you, learning the names of the wild things around you. And there is, if you use journaling in your own real life for the children in your life, whether you are a parent, grandparent, or educator, there's a lot of wonderful value in that for just practicing handwriting, but also learning about the world around yourself. So I think there is a lot to learn from that. And I thought it was a really fun way to share facts without being, to kind of use what you've said, Mary Alice, for your adult books. You've said this before in speeches. You don't ever want to feel like you're beating someone over the head with facts, right? This is where the power of storytelling comes into play. You can use a fictional story to truly share and impart and make it memorable, very important facts about the world around you.
Well, I think I'm kind of curious. I'm looking at the time. If anyone has any questions out there, I know we can keep on going for another 20 minutes. We're having so much fun just talking to each other.
Yes.
But are there any questions out there that we have coming in?
Yes, we do have a question. Someone is wondering, what is the Lexile level of the novel?
It's a good question. I will look that up. I think it's on the website. I know there should be, under the age, there should be also the Lexile information that our Ed Library team includes, but I can do that very quickly, look it up for you if that's
Okay,
Well, and when, hey, Allie, when I pulled up, so written on the curriculum guide by Aladdin Books. So for Common Core state standards, this is for grades, when it comes to ELA, grades 4 through 6. But this book is geared toward the 3rd through 7th grade. And so it does list like main reading level would be 4th through 6th grade. I hope that helps for whoever asked that question.
And it's, honestly, it's such a crazy thing. I think more than anywhere other level, middle grade, your kids are just either fast advanced readers or they're slow starters. I think you just have to know what level your kid reads at. And again, if your child's an advanced reader at 10 or 11, it doesn't mean that child should start reading young adult books, because the reading level does vary a lot. But as Allie pointed out earlier, content is very different.
Yes.
I'm curious, since your book was such a success, Mary Alice, are you going to write another middle grade book? And Angela, are you interested in also writing additional books?
Well, first of all, we got one more together. The sequel comes out next year, and we're already working on it. And we're very excited to hand it in to Allie. So definitely we have one more together, and I'll let Angela answer the next one.
Well, so we are writing one together, and that's so exciting. And I also have other stories that I hope to get all out from beginning to end on paper, and hope to have the opportunity to continue contributing to children's fiction, both with Mary Alice and on my own.
And I'll be honest, I absolutely love it. When I wrote a couple of years back, a book called A Low Country Christmas. And it was not a sweet Christmas book. I mean, this is much more like It's a Wonderful Life. And it's the story of, a father coming home from war. And then it was the voice of the 10-year-old boy, Miller, just bubbled right out of me. I really loved writing. And that book won the Southern Prize for Fiction. So that was my validation that, yes, I can write for this age group. And then this is the first determined middle grade book, because A Low Country Christmas is one of the books Faye described as an adult novel with a child in it. And yet the voice was what excited me, this boy's voice. And that's why I loved writing, Jake's voice too. And I think in the future, there's going to be more. Of course, I love it.
And since you, Mary Alice, have a book that was turned into a movie, do you see, or anyone on our panel see, The Islanders becoming?
Yes.
Yes, we're working
Are you
on
kidding?
Yeah.
All some movie company has to do is go to Dewees Island, put a tripod up, a camera, and you've got your setting. It's right there. I think, honestly, the multi-generational aspect of the story, the setting is right there, but it's so heartfelt between the grandmother and the grandson and these 3 diverse kids. I clearly, yes.
Great.
And from your lips to God's ears.
Yeah, there you go. Hopefully someone's listening. And maybe one more question. This might be more towards Allison and Faye. In talking about middle school books dealing with difficult issues or, issues that are current, do you see, in light of this being Pride Month, more books coming out by or for young people dealing with LGBTQ issues?
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Great.
There are incredible books that have already been published, and many in the pipeline by LGBTQ plus authors. Absolutely, there's a tremendous amount, and also really wonderful resources that help parents and caregivers kind of comb through what might be best for them and what might not. And there are books for younger readers that win the Lammy Awards, and I mean there are terrific ways for people to find those books.
Great. Well, good. Maybe if we'll close it out. I don't know if anyone has any last comments to make. Anybody?
I'm just so want to say thank you to everyone I'm sharing the panel with today. I mean, every one of you said yes to the request that I wanted to write a middle grade book. And I am just so grateful to you all. It's been an exhilarating ride and a vocation. I think this has really turned into something that I'm just so grateful to have in my life. So thank you, Angela, Faye, and Allison.
Well, we are all
Thank
better
you, Mary
for it.
Alice, for asking. And I hope that everybody enjoys reading The Islanders this summer. I think one thing that's really special about The Islanders is even though it's written for, 8 to 12-year-olds, it's truly a book that could be enjoyed by families, people of all ages. So pick it up, share it with the people special in your lives, and enjoy The Islanders.
That's such a good point.
Yes, thank you for saying that. I think it's really important to know that young people love to read with their families. I know my kids, even when they got into middle school, like to be read to. So I think it's a perfect book for families to read for the summer. You go on vacation, you can bring it, and every evening read a chapter. So I think that's great advice. And I want to just thank you all so much. This was an incredible discussion. I loved it. I hope we get to do it again on the next book, which we'll be looking forward to. And please remember that Book Passage has copies of The Islanders, and you can order your books online. You can call and order them. We'll send them to you if you can't pick them up. But we really want to promote The Islanders and middle school books in general. So feel free to call Book Passage and get recommendations for additional books. And again, we really appreciate our panel. We appreciate our viewers watching this. And we want to just say thank you. Have a wonderful weekend, and everybody take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy reading, everyone.